Kalila Reynolds, and welcome to another episode of Taking Stock. We're bringing you all the latest business and finance news and telling you how it will affect you and your money. So come on, let's get this money. First up, it's finally out. The TransJamaican Highway prospectus. You've waited months and now it's here. We'll hear all about it from Finance Minister Dr. Nigel Clarke. And later, it's all about trans with the Analysts. We're dissecting the IPO. But first, here's What's Hot, brought to you by Jamaica Money Market Brokers, your best interest at heart. The prospectus for the TransJamaican Highway IPO is finally out. The offer opens on February 17 and is scheduled to close on March 9. The cost, $1.41 Jamaican or 1 cent US per share. The government, through NROC, is offering 8 billion shares for sale and seeking to raise 80 million US or 11 billion Jamaican dollars. They also have the right to upsize by an additional 2 billion shares if it's oversubscribed. This would increase the raise to 100 million US or 14 billion Jamaican dollars. For a detailed breakdown of the TransJamaican Highway IPO, check out this week's Money Mondays JA. Meanwhile, another IPO hit the market on Friday. Life and health insurance company Caribbean Assurance Brokers is seeking to raise $100 million with shares priced at $1.92 each. However, this will be a tough one to get into for the public, as 44 of the 52 million shares are reserved for company directors, staff, long-standing clients, and lead broker Mayberry. CAB says it will use the IPO proceeds to expand to other Caribbean territories, invest in more solar technology, and provide working capital for the company. The offer opens February 18. And another IPO news, First Rock's initial public offer was oversubscribed when it closed on January 31. The real estate company was initially seeking $12 million US, but has the option to upsize to as much as $18 million. No word yet on how much they raised in total. President of the Jamaica Manufacturers and Exporters Association, JMEA, Richard Pandohi, says he's concerned about raw material and equipment imported from China amid the new coronavirus outbreak. However, he says his members aren't panicking as they're now sourcing supplies from different markets. Most factories in China had closed for their Lunar New Year celebrations. Their expected reopening has been delayed because of the virus. Meanwhile, the Jamaica Postal Service has suspended outbound mail service to China and Hong Kong effective Monday, February 10. In a statement, the post office says it's been left with no choice as their airline partners have suspended service to those countries. However, customers can still use their fast-track service to send packages to China, with the exception of Wuhan, the heart of the new coronavirus outbreak. What's Hot was brought to you by Jamaica Money Market Brokers, your best interest at heart. And when we come back, the details of the offer for the TransJamaican Highway IPO are finally out. The Finance Minister, Dr. Nigel Clarke, joins me right here, Taking Stock. Taking Stock is filmed on location at I Create Studio on Hope Road.
There's a surplus of unfilled jobs in the creative industry. Kickstart a creative career with I Create Institute.
Now I'm at I Create, I just love it.
I saw where I was learning things that I could utilize in my present job.
And I have all the skills to do every basic animation thing now.
Jumpstart a creative career with I Create Institute at UCC. Visit icreateedu.com.
This segment of Taking Stock is brought to you by Bulwark Insurance Agent. Insurance made easy. Welcome back to Taking Stock, and special thanks to our newest sponsor, Wistinka, for providing our water today. Well, let's get right into it, yeah? Because the TransJamaican Highway IPO, the prospectus is now out, the most highly anticipated prospectus, at least since WIGTON wind farm. The share price is $1.41 Jamaican each, or 1 cent US. Joining me now to tell me more about it is the Finance Minister, Dr. Nigel Clarke. Welcome to Taking Stock.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming. I really appreciate you coming on the program and talking to the people.
My pleasure. I remember the last time I spoke with you, I said to you that the IPO for TransJamaica was imminent, and that was just in December, and here we are.
Tell me, what makes TransJamaican Highway IPO special?
TransJamaica represents one of the largest infrastructure projects in Jamaica. Or to be more precise, Highway 2000 represents one of the largest infrastructure projects in Jamaica, and TransJamaica is an important part of that. And so this represents the first time that Jamaicans will have an opportunity to invest directly in highway infrastructure assets in the country. And it's special as well because it is the largest IPO in Jamaica's history by a factor of nearly 3. The largest before now was WIGTON wind farm last year, and that was just 5.5 billion. This IPO, if it is upsized, would go to 14 billion. What is special is that the government is bringing an asset to the market that is setting a record by a factor of 3 for the largest IPO. The government is leading the way.
Breaking your own record, because WIGTON was the government too.
Correct. And leading the way in a new phase of Jamaica, where our capital markets are intended to play a much greater role in growth and development by enabling the financing of businesses and the financing of projects.
But when people think IPOs and companies and stock market, you don't typically think highway. Is this something that's common around the world?
Yes, you see, there are many asset classes, first of all, and within the asset class of equity securities, there are many sectors. And one sector that's represented in stock exchanges around the world is the sector of sort of infrastructure assets, project-related, or companies that are centered around ownership of project assets. And that is what this represents.
You know, there's been a lot of interest in this from the public and especially on social media. So
Yes.
I brought some questions from social media as well to ask you. One person was asking if there's a cap on how many shares a single purchaser can buy, because the concern is that...
I must tell you, that is the single most frequent question
Really?
I've got. That is probably sending a signal that people are interested. I've got that question quite a few times.
But there's a concern that it could end up being a monopoly. Not a monopoly, but one person owning a majority share in Jamaica's highway, and it could be a foreigner.
Well, I mean, the government at the end of the IPO will own 20% of TransJamaican Highway. But don't forget that before December, this was a highway that was owned by foreigners.
Right.
And it didn't bother us. It started in 2001. It was owned by Bui, that owned nearly 50% of it, 49%, and Vinci owned, I believe, 25%. The IFC owned another stake. It is an asset that has been in Jamaica for nearly 20 years, and for all of that 20 years, it has been exclusively owned by foreigners.
But the point now is to put it in Jamaicans' hands.
This is the first time that it is going to be held by Jamaicans. Even the government was not an owner of this highway up until December of 2019. So for the first time, it's in Jamaican hands, and it will be a mixture of the government at 20% and institutional, retail, and other investors for the balance at 80%. And here I'm using the figure if it's upsized. If it's not upsized, the Jamaican government will be at 36%, and the private sector will be at 64%. But let me delve into some of the things that you're asking. You'll notice in the prospectus that we have different categories of ownership, different reserve categories. So there's an amount reserved for employees of the companies that are involved in this sector, and that's approximately 100 million or so. There's approximately 500 million in terms of dollars reserved for persons who are ETAG customers, and you have an opportunity to qualify for this segment if you purchase your ETAG before the 14th of February, which is Valentine's Day.
Right.
And then we have just over nearly $1.4 billion reserved for public sector employees, and then an amount reserved for the underwriters who are taking risk, and we can talk about that later on. Then we have a special segment for pension funds, and then the remainder for the public. So at the end of the process, we expect this to be fairly diversified ownership base consisting of Jamaican investors and the government.
So because of the various levels of reserved shares, no one person would be able to own a majority.
On the completion of the IPO, it is going to be fairly widely held, and thereafter, it's subject to market dynamics. For a fixed life asset, remember this is an asset that definitely has a fixed life, which can be extended by virtue of going into other businesses, and an asset that is regulated. Remember, it's the one would have to think about the incentives and disincentives for trying to mount such an accumulation. It's the kind of asset that if you're investing in, you're going to want to have company, right? You're not going to want to be invested in something like that alone.
Right.
So, it's analogous to other infrastructure assets that we have, whether it's with the Jamaica Public Service Company, which is owned 80% by the Koreans and the Japanese. That in itself doesn't affect the delivery of service. The electricity sector is one that is regulated. And in this case, there's a toll regulator that regulates the service provided. And NROC also has an oversight function to monitor the delivery of the service that is offered by TransJamaican Highway and its operation and maintenance partner, the Jamaica Infrastructure Operations Company.
Let's talk about the buyback of the highway.
Yes.
As you mentioned the last time we spoke, you said that would have been completed. It was completed, I think, the 23rd of December.
Yes.
So explain how the financing for that works.
Okay, so what happened is the French owners made a global decision that they wanted to step back from direct ownership and participate, certainly of brownfield assets, and participate in the earlier stages of development.
And brownfield meaning mature?
Brownfield meaning mature, yeah. So this is an asset that has been around for 20 years. So all of the teething pains have been ironed out. The legal, environmental, and other risks have been dealt with. And so it's a pretty mature asset. So they decided that they wanted to exit. And that is a process that exit could have gone in any way.
So they wanted to exit. It wasn't something where the government said, we feel it's time that we take over.
But let me rephrase that. The exit was arrived, I believe, mutually for historical reasons. But what I'm saying is that it coincided with a global decision by at least one of the French firms, one of them, that direct participation in ownership of brownfield assets such as this was no longer strategic for them. That exit could have happened in many ways. We saw it as an opportunity to further our policy of broadening the ownership base of the Jamaican economy. And so we set out to enter into a back-to-back transaction where we would purchase the highway from the exiting shareholders. Well, all of the shareholders are exiting, and then immediately on the same terms and conditions, at the same price that we bought it at, make it available to the Jamaican public. So in December of last year, the government of Jamaica would have acquired 100% of TransJamaica from its owners in a transaction that was financed by a bridge loan of $72 million. Now, bear in mind that prior to this transaction, they owned 100% of the ordinary shares, but the government had participating preference shares that entitled it to 50% of the profits. So in essence, the government had a 50% economic interest, even though it didn't have a voting interest, okay? And I can explain that in a second. So we purchased all of the ordinary shares that were outstanding and restructured the capital structure of the company, converted the preference shares as is described in the offering memorandum. On the purchase of the ordinary shares owned by the French firms and by the IFC, the terms of the debt was provided by a consortium led by the IDB, in which other multilaterals had participated, Proparco from the French multilateral lending agency, and I believe others were participating as well. And they had a condition, which is normal and customary, that on a change of control of TransJamaica, all of the debt would become due and payable. So in preparing to repurchase the shares from the owners, we had also had to prepare to pay back the debt that was outstanding. We, through TransJamaica, were able to enter into a bridge loan facility to borrow the 72 million to purchase the shares, and to also, in two loans, one for 133 million, one for 16 million, borrow on a bridge loan basis to repay the debt obligations that were due to the lenders under the change of control
So how much did it cost the government total?
So in total, you'll be talking about 72 plus approximately 150, and that's 220. And then there were some breakage fees and some other costs. So, you're talking about a transaction that would have, all told, be 220, 230, 240 million US dollars. Now, I should follow that up by saying that since that time, and as the intention was, what we would have done, having purchased it, the steps in parallel were being made for it to be offered in an IPO. And just that your viewers understand that the government acts prudently and with due regard to risk. Prior to concluding on the purchase arrangement of the stake from the French owners, we would have entered into an underwriting agreement with the underwriters to say that in an IPO that they would stand ready to purchase up to 51% of the company if we needed to rely on that. So the underwriters provided a backstop so that the government would not be stuck.
So that would be in case the offer is not fully taken up for whatever reason.
Correct.
The underwriters who are NCB and JMMB would fill in.
Would fill in and take up 51%. So the government would not have this company on its book. In a worst case scenario, the government would just be in a minority position, which was absolutely essential because we would have been borrowing money to effect the transaction. And to be responsible, the government didn't want to be in a position where we could be stuck with the debt over a long period of time. So that was the purpose of the underwriting arrangement, which provided the backstop to allow us to go forward. Having completed that buyback, so we immediately set on two things. One is to get the IPO launched, but the other was to get a bond issue launched by TransJamaica. And the bond was launched immediately prior to the release of the IPO documents. And that bond was for $225 million, the use of proceeds being to repay the $150 million bridge loan that in the two parts, 133 and 16, that was used to pay out the original lenders. And this bond is a long-term bond we raised on the back of a rating by international rating agency Fitch, which rated TransJamaica at BB, I think BB minus, which is higher
than the sovereign rating.
Than the rating of the sovereign of Jamaica. There are not many instances where a company can be rated higher than the sovereign. So that was very good news. And the bond actually was priced, and something I'll say here, that the price of the bond is actually inside of what the model assumed. So the projections, the documents would have assumed a yield of 6.4%. It turns out that the pricing is now actually 5.75%. So there's approximately 0.7 or 0.65 differential on 225 million. You can do the math. That means that the company will be better off by about $1.5 million a year by virtue of, relative to the projections, by virtue of a superior pricing on the bond. In addition...
So that brings their debt financing costs down.
It brings their debt financing costs down, vis-a-vis where the projections were. And just so you viewers understand, the debt that TransJamaica had before with the multilaterals was at 9.4%. The debt, as I just described, that has been renegotiated by an international bond issue is at 5.75%, which is a huge difference. And it is also smaller than lower than the 6.4% assumption in the projections that are in the IPO prospectus.
Oh.
So that's good news. And as I
So
said,
that means better profits for the company going forward.
that means that,
Better profits than even in the prospectus.
relative to the projections in the prospectus, yes, the change in the lower interest cost, 6.4 to 5.75 approximately, means lower finance costs and therefore higher profits to the tune of the number I mentioned, about $1.4, $1.5 million. And as I said, the proceeds of that bond issue will be utilized to retire that debt bridge financing that TransJamaica entered into. So the only thing outstanding after the bond issue is the $72 million equity bridge, which will be paid from the proceeds of the IPO.
Proceeds of the IPO.
But if I could also just say, and I know that I might be, that the bond was oversubscribed by $800 million.
Wow.
TransJamaica went to raise $225 million. It had approximately $1 billion of applications.
Wow.
And this is a bond.
And that's on the international capital markets.
The international capital markets. It had applications in from Singapore, London, New York, Boston.
So
Zurich.
Jamaica is hot.
Well, Jamaica has not issued a lot of debt, because we've been concentrated on paying back debt, and obviously our dynamics are a lot improved, and there was a lot of interest in TransJamaica in particular, and that's good news for Jamaica, but it's also good news for TransJamaica, the company.
One of the things that definitely caught my attention and that I've been curious about for some time is the concession agreement. And I noticed that that's been renegotiated as of the 28th of January, 2020. There's been this clause in there that indicated if the government was to improve competing roads, Mandela being one of them, then they would have to be compensated for loss of volume of traffic. Is that change effective January 28th, is that retroactive? Because I noticed they've already lost some volume since the upgrade.
That reference in the prospectus relates to a historical issue. There was a difference of views historically with whether or not there was any liability that would accrue to the former owners by virtue of the expansion of Mandela Highway. And to remove any possibility, and obviously the government's position, differed. That's not the case. And what we did upon purchasing is to amend that clause so that that historical issue, does not arise. That's a historical issue. The highway has already been expanded, and you've seen the numbers since it has expanded. You'll have noticed though in the last, certainly from 2013 coming upwards, the traffic volumes have increased quite steadily. And traffic volumes are really related to economic performance. People move around a lot more if the economy is doing well. If people are employed, if there's economic activity, people move around. So to answer that question, took the opportunity of the ownership by the government to remove room for a historical conflict or historical difference of opinion to arise in the future.
So there's been no claim against the government that since you've improved Mandela, they've lost sales and you now need to compensate them.
As I said, there's a difference of opinion as to whether, not that they have lost sales, because as you can see, revenues have grown by 10.2 or 10.5%.
But it could have been higher.
Revenues have grown by 10.5% a year between 2014 and 2018. However, there would have been a viewpoint under the prior dispensation that, yes, if you didn't build Mandela Highway, then, or you didn't expand it, then, maybe it could have grown even faster. And so to remove any chance of that recurring or for that a claim in the future, that clause was removed. But the traffic projections that are shown in the prospectus, which have been conducted by a professional independent expert in this area, are based on the lay of the land as it is now, meaning with an expanded Mandela Highway.
That still doesn't quite answer my question, though. Has there been any claim? You said you describe it as a legal difference of opinion.
But a claim is I'm just staying away because a claim is a legal term.
True.
And I have not, I'm the Minister of Finance. What I'm doing here is, in terms of assets that the country owns and,
But they haven't come to you and said, you owe us money because of this.
No, we don't have any claim outstanding. If that's the question you're asking, there's no claim that the government is a respondent to relating to the widening of Mandela Highway.
And now with this change, it's not going to happen
with this
going
change,
forward.
it would not happen going forward, no.
I didn't notice anything about the possibility of competing rail, though. I don't know if that's a direction that the government was considering, or if that needed to have been in a change in the concession agreement as well.
You mean if people are going to start taking
Trains from Kingston to Spanish Town, for example.
Let's put it this way.
We know your colleague minister is all about the multimodal, right?
Right. But, cargo and so on would have to come first.
Right.
The horizon over which you could see large volumes, hundreds of thousands of people moving by locomotive in Jamaica, it would be several years away. Remember, under the concession has 18 years left. Yes, it can be renewed, but if it's going to be renewed, you'd renew on the terms that exist at that point in time. If you're to start today that you're going to put subways in and so on, those projects are decade-long projects, right? So
you cross that bridge when you reach it.
Yeah, but look, the idea with investing and with equities is not to provide free lunches, right? If it were free lunches, then the opportunity wouldn't exist, right? There are risks, and that's why you have to consult your investment advisor, and you make investments that are commensurate with your risk appetite. But there's no doubt about it, the returns that are embedded in the transaction, in the prospective, are returns that are calculated to reward investors for the risk that they're taking. But it's not without risk.
Yeah. I noticed that TransJamaica, now that the government owns it for this period of time before the IPO, is now a public body, which means that it's entitled to no income tax. Does it continue to be that post-IPO?
No, it's not entitled to no income tax. TransJamaica has tax losses. So it has $85 million of tax losses. And under Jamaica's income tax code, if a corporate entity has tax losses, then under certain terms and conditions, those tax losses can be used against future profits. And I don't want to get into the specifics of the terms of the thing, but to the extent that TransJamaica makes profit next year and the year after and the year after, it can apply some of the tax losses from the past to set off the corporate income tax obligations that it has.
Okay, I think that explains it. Let's take another question from Twitter. People have been asking, what role do you expect TransJamaica to play in future developments outside of the ones they have first rights of refusal? Do they have the capacity to build or just supervise and then run toll after check? They're assuming it would be check builds the proposed projects.
That's an excellent question. So, part of the reason why we've wanted to do this, so the policy objectives broaden ownership base of the Jamaican economy, provide assets for institutions to investing as the government of Jamaica deleverages. That's a very important objective. And with respect to TransJamaican Highway, we are catalyzing the emergence of a Jamaican-owned private sector player in the infrastructure asset space to which we could look to in the future to help to finance other infrastructure plays. So the government of Jamaica has access to revenue from taxpayers, and there's a lot of competing uses for those proceeds: health, education, transportation, et cetera, et cetera. To the extent that we can, from time to time, deploy on a competitive basis infrastructure assets, and there are established entities that can compete for it, then we are more secure and we're better off as we have options. So, by way of example, not any commitment, but by way of example, the government of Jamaica has been speaking about the Montego Bay bypass, and we'll hear more about that next month. But let us say if that were completed and we own it, the government of Jamaica owns it, and it's, there's a possibility it could be tolled, and if it were, we could under a competitive process put it up for divestment, and companies could bid. TransJamaica could be one of those that bid. Others, like foreign companies, could bid, and by so doing, TransJamaica could expand the assets it has under management. It's really an asset management company in the infrastructure space. Now, the opportunities don't end with the Montego Bay bypass. As the prospectus makes clear, the government has planned a number of infrastructure projects that could be tolled, bypasses of Hopewell, of Anata Bay, of Aracabessa, of Lucy, and so forth. And all of those, if we so decided or we needed to, we could put up for infrastructure players to bid for, and the government would have resources that it could use for other purposes.
But there's no guarantee TransJamaica Highway Company would win those bids.
There's no guarantee they'll
Right.
win those bids, right?
There are
as I said,
opportunities,
there are opportunities. We want an economy where private sector players don't earn money for nothing. You earn money by taking risk. We need a private sector that is motivated by the returns that comes from taking calculated risk. So there's no guarantee of that. However, what I'd say to you is that the returns that are forecasted in the prospectus, which, by the way, are returns based on, TransJamaica has historically had a US dollar-based balance sheet and financial statements. So the returns, I believe, are consistent with that currency. But those returns that are forecasted are based on what is contractually TransJamaica's right, meaning those returns are based on just this concession. So if this concession were to come to an end and there's no more opportunity, the return would be as is forecasted in the prospectus, which I believe is 13 to 14%. The upside opportunity comes from, one, TransJamaica has the right to acquire the extension to the East-West Highway, which goes from Maypen to Williams Field. So they would, in a negotiation with the government in the future, they have the right, they can turn it down if they want to, but they have the right to say, look, we think that this leg is worth X, we'll pay you, government, X for it, and we'll collect the tolls going forward. And remember, this extension is 29 kilometers, which is more than half the current length of TransJamaica. So TransJamaica could extend the length of its highway by 50% through the purchase of the Maypen to Williams Field leg. That's the first upside. The second upside is that TransJamaica could renew its concession when the current concession comes to an end. And a third upside opportunity is that TransJamaica could bid on other infrastructure assets or on any other, it's a private company after this. It could bid on any other thing that it wants to do. And remember that after this bond issue is completed, TransJamaica will start life with nearly $25 million of cash that's free and unrestricted. Remember, it's raising $225 million. Approximately, you'll have some fees to pay, brokerage and investment bank fees, so it might be net $220 million. And after it pays back the debt that it has, and it makes provision for putting funds in escrow under the concession agreement, they have to have a certain amount of capital in the bank. Under the debt agreement, they have to have a certain amount of principal repayments in the bank. After accounting for all of those, and after paying to NROC what is due to NROC and is disclosed in the prospectus, it's going to have approximately $25 million of just free cash that is unencumbered, that's not earmarked for anything, 25 million US on its balance sheet. And that is designed in that way so that TransJamaica would have an opportunity to pursue whatever direction it wanted to pursue going forward. So in summary, the base case provides double-digit returns, and there are multiple upside opportunities going forward.
Here's another very popular question on Twitter. Will the public, i.e. the new owners, have a say in the toll rates?
Okay, that's a Jamaica is becoming a much more sophisticated country with these kinds of assets now being publicly owned in the public domain and so forth. Jamaica has a toll authority which decides on toll rates, and that's an independent regulator that has performed that function for 20 years and will continue to perform that function indefinitely. Under the concession agreement with TransJamaica, there is a cap on the toll at any point in time. That cap has been there from the beginning. There's nothing that is changing in how things are done, right, with respect to this. That cap is related to the initial toll 20 years ago and a formula on a periodic basis that deals with escalation. And the TransJamaica would make an application on a periodic basis for the tolls to be aligned with the changes in variables, and the toll regulator would either would approve or so forth. What I'd say to you, the way in which toll numbers will go from here is similar, is exactly the same as how it happened before.
So the answer is no.
The answer is no. The company is going to.
Well, they'll decide if they want an increase or not. And so at that point in time, the owners have a say. You go to your annual general meeting and say,
yes, and
should the rates be raised?
Correct, but you have a cap.
And then they apply.
You can't raise it beyond the agreement is a solid agreement with the international benchmark, and as I said, it has a cap on each time frame. And as long as you're within that cap, TransJamaica has a right to make the application. So yes, at the annual general meeting, the shareholders, who are the owners, can have a conversation about those things.
Whether or not it should be raised.
Yes,
okay.
and
so
ultimately
so
the board that represents the shareholders, represents all shareholders, will be responsible for the decisions. At the end of the day, in the same way that we want a Jamaica where the private sector recognizes that things have to be constructed in a way where they take a risk in the prospect of return, it's the same way that we, the people, also recognize that where investors have taken risk, that a market-based return is simply fair. Okay? And TransJamaica, even though the ownership is changing, TransJamaica, the entity, still lives on. And that entity has spent a considerable amount of money developing this highway, was going to have $225 million of debt outstanding, and needs to, provide a return for those who make an investment in that structure.
Last question. So after the bridge loans and the IPO fees are paid off, there is some money left over, about $500 million thereabouts, $485 million, I think. What is that likely to be used for?
Well, as the prospectus said, that the Ministry of Finance and NROC will
make a decision
on that. And, we wait to see the bids that come in or the applications that come in, to see the extent of the application. And then we can, once we know or have a sense of the direction it's going in, we can be more firm about that.
Okay. So in another month or so, I can ask you.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Well, I'll leave the last word to you. What would you like to tell the Jamaican people right now?
Well, I just download the prospectus. It's long, it's lengthy, and it's lengthy because to disclose all the relevant information. Take a good look at it. If you don't understand anything, ask. Consult your investment advisor, your stockbroker, and then make a decision. I'd encourage you to take a serious look at it. But always remember as well that there is risk in investing, and you don't invest in equities more than you can afford to lose, right? That's a general principle. I know we're going through a period where a lot of people are coming into the market, which is very, very, very good. And it's always important to remind people that as attractive as opportunities are, you want to make sure that you balance your portfolios. But I'm not here to give investment advice. You should consult your investment advisor.
Nice disclaimer. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Clarke. Much appreciated.
My pleasure.
All right.
My pleasure.
When we come back, I'll have your market recap, and the analysts are standing by. This segment of Taking Stock was brought to you by Bulwark Insurance Agency. Insurance made easy. Time now for your market recap. It was a bear market last week, as the analysts say many people cashed out their stocks in order to get funds for the TransJamaican IPO. 88 stocks traded across both the main and junior markets of the JSE for the week ending Friday, February 7, 2020. 20 advanced, 56 declined, and 12 traded firm. Nearly 162 million shares changed hands on the Jamaican dollar market, totaling $600 million. Topping the list was Select F. People traded 52 million shares in the company, taking up 32% of market volume. The stock gained 2 cents to start this week at $1.05. WIGTON Wind Farm traded the second highest volumes, taking up 28%. The stock lost 9 cents, with people buying and selling nearly 46 million shares in the company. WIGTON opened the week at 84 cents. And Select M also traded heavily, with people buying and selling nearly 19 million shares in the company. The stock price remained unchanged, opening this week at 93 cents. Turning to the top advancers now, Pulse Investment saw the biggest gain. Its share price jumped nearly 24% to open the week at $8.02. 138 Student Living Jamaica gained an impressive 18% to close the week at $5. And Margaritaville Turks US dollars rose nearly 13% to close the week at 35 cents US. On the losing side now, Kingston Properties and Sterling Investments US dollars were the biggest losers, both down 20%. Caprete opened the week at $6, while Sterling started Monday's trading at 2 cents US. And Siboney Group and Derrimon Trading 2021 preference shares both lost nearly 17% last week. Siboney opened Monday at 10 cents, while Derrimon started the week at $1.50. This segment of Taking Stock, The Analysts, is brought to you by Proven Wealth, Jamaica Money Market Brokers, and Ideal Portfolio Services. Welcome back to Taking Stock. I've got a team of analysts to examine the week in business. Not really, just TransJamaica. That's everything everybody wants to know about for this week. I've got with me Senior Wealth Advisor at Ideal Portfolio Services, Oric Angus, Young Investor at the University of the West Indies, David Rose, and Senior Capital Markets Analyst at JMMB, Simon Guru in Training Johnson. Welcome back.
Thank you.
We've all been digesting this nearly 300-page prospectus, a lot of heavy reading. Oric, you get the honors of going first. What are your thoughts?
It's 300 pages, a lot of information to go through, but in summary, I think it's a great deal. It's a great offer. It's a good asset to add to an individual portfolio for diversification purposes.
Because there's nothing else like it on the market.
Exactly, there's nothing else like it on the market. It's a good income play as well to provide dividends from its consistent cash flow over time. So I do think it's a good offer, and I think everyone should take part in the IPO.
And you're in a position to make that kind of recommendation.
I am.
David is not a licensed financial advisor, but what are your thoughts, David?
It's a pretty large and pretty interesting offer. So many transactions. The government bought it back in December, coming to market in February, and it presents a unique opportunity for Jamaicans to say, hey, we own the highway, not the French, not some Chinese or anybody else, but Jamaican owners. So I'm still haven't gone through as much as I should have, but it's a pretty good offer. And it depends on what's your purpose. So long term, it's a good opportunity once everything plays out.
Simon?
Yeah, so full disclosure, JMMB is a co-broker for TransJamaican Highway. I think overall, TransJamaica Highway Limited is a good investment. I think it's particularly suited to investors with a long-term time horizon. As Oric said, investors that are looking for some diversification in their portfolio because of its natural inflation hedge and its natural lack of correlation. It's not really correlated much with the rest of the economy as it pertains to the financial market, etc. I think from the US dollar perspective, the IRR is in around 14%.
What's IRR?
So it's an internal rate of return. It's basically if you hold the investment for around the next 16 years, this is the percentage, let's say on average, that you would get on your portfolio over that period. It's around 14% on US dollars, which is pretty attractive, even given the project nature of it. But on the flip side of that, because the IRR is calculated on dividend flows coming out of the company is expected to have healthy dividend flows, especially over the mid to latter part of the life of it. So I think the starting dividend yield was around 5% on US dollars. That's not something that accredited investors or retail investors could normally get on a US dollar investment in Jamaica. And that goes upward to double digits, which is crazy in US dollars. So I think the highest in the high case scenario was around 60% in 2036 on US dollars. So overall, I think it's a relatively good investment given the fundamentals that offer.
Right.
Oric, what do you make of the share price? Because a lot of people were thinking, oh, it's going to be 50 cents like WIGTON. It's 141. What are your thoughts on the price?
Yes, from a retail investor standpoint, many people believe that, or the notion is that the 141 is too high. We had been anticipating or hoping that it was around the same as WIGTON's price at 50 cents. Obviously, it's a more valuable company based on our valuation of the stock price as well. We think it's fairly priced. It's a little below fair value, so that's why we're recommending the position that we are to buy.
David, why your face makeup?
I'm always serious.
Anything that concerns you about this IPO though?
Well, as for those who wouldn't have probably noticed, considering the size of the document, you have the $35 million dividend payment, which is due in around June, paid to the government, because it's based on who owned the company on January 24. You also have the concern regarding the potential diversification of the company, because they say they want to become a group of companies going into other areas. So for them to actually go further, it's going to be pretty interesting to see how they raise the capital going forward to, realize some of those opportunities. But I'm not going to say that there are certain risk factors right now, considering that there are so many things that I probably might not know since I haven't gone through the entire prospectus, and especially the MD&A. But
the what?
The MD&A, Management Discussion and Analysis, which is where the management team discusses the company, how it's performing, what is expected to go forward. So I'm going to that area fully, but based on what I've seen, it's a pretty interesting opportunity. So Portmore has about $3.6 billion last year, JMD, and based on the opportunity for them to have first right of refusal to operate phase 1C to William C from Mappin, there are opportunities there, but as I said, I don't just advise about the other risks that I cannot say because I have to review still.
I understand.
On that topic of risk, Simon, anything caught your attention?
I mean, overall, given the nature of the project, and David alluded to it as well, where Portmore is a majority of the revenues that TransJamaica makes and the toll traffic. I mean, it could be that people decide to not use the Portmore Causeway through that toll over a period, and traffic is significantly or materially affected because of, let's say, further widening on Mandela or a reduced appetite to go on Portmore Toll Road. So, I mean, there are factors surrounding that. I just wanted to touch on the price issue, though, Khalila. So we have to remember that the price of a company is determined not just by the value, but the number of shares that they have outstanding. So relatively to, let's say, a WIGTON that came out at 50 cents, even though this has 12.5 billion units outstanding, the overall value is much bigger, as Oracle alluded to. So if more shares were issued, then even though the value would be exactly the same, the price could come down to as low as they wanted to. So I wouldn't say, I mean, yes, the nominal price or the dollar price, the $1.41, is technically is higher than the 50 cents, but relatively to the amount of shares that it has, the valuation maybe different.
If I can touch on that as well, you have to consider apples for apples. In this case, WIGTON's balance sheet was around $6 to $7 billion in terms of assets, and for TransJamaica, we're talking about $336 million US dollars upwards, which will translate to around 140 billion GMD. So there's a different methodology you have to consider as well. So at $5.5 billion raise to $6 billion worth of assets for 50 cents, that's different. But to consider a company of this size with a number of shares, you can't look at it in that same perspective.
A risk factor that the company would have mitigated in the latest arrangement of the concession agreement would be that naturally, because the nature of the project, it has a 16-year life up to when the concession ends. I mean, before the renegotiation of the agreement, they would have had to hand over the roads to the government and
In
the
60
operation
years.
of such
Right.
in
But that's been
2036,
changed
and they
now.
would have to bid for that if the government decides to put another concession on it. So what the government has done now, and I guess some negotiation with TransJamaica and NRAC went about there, is they have given them the right from now, or the option. So TransJamaica has the option to, when they get close to 2036, to extend that for another 35 years. So the value of the concession on the balance sheet, as David alluded to, is majority of the assets. It's going to go down, but over time in 2036, that balance sheet can recoup some value if they do decide to extend the concession.
Yeah, so investors have a little more certainty in the long term of the company.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, what are the opportunities you see for expansion for this company?
They do plan to diversify their revenue stream through real estate and throughout the region by building other infrastructure. So that's an opportunity as well, a long-term opportunity.
Is that realistic when they say they're going to be looking at other CARICOM countries for, do you think Dominica is ready for like a toll road, for example?
Yeah, I mean,
It's a very small country.
it is. But when you look at the
Nothing
ability
against
for
Dominica, I'm just saying that
the ability for everyone is looking into
Smaller population,
increasing
smaller
productivity, regardless of how small the population is. And if investment in infrastructure, for example, like roads, can do that, then that's definitely an investment tool that they should look into. Yeah. And just to touch on what Simon said in terms of the risk involved, the TransJamaican Highway, there are a lot of edging tools that were put in place to mitigate against these risks. So for example, like there is FX risk and inflation risk that is put in place to manage these consistent revenue streams over time. Yeah.
Yes, Simon?
So I was saying that, remember, Bowie and Vinci, which are from Europe, may look at Jamaica and say that, boy, we can't make the money from Jamaica when it's small. So it depends on the value proposition that you get. But I think the major opportunity, well, in my opinion, for TransJamaica is the extension of the highway that they currently already built, and that they have the right of first refusal to extend. So that's from Maypen to Williamsfield. And also remember, the Millennium Project for the government is to circle Jamaica with toll roads, such that all major cities are linked. So because TransJamaica has already started the East-West, it seems natural that they would not only get the right to extend from Maypen to Williamsfield, but have that further extension. I think the next one is from Williamsfield to Montego Bay, to have that extension going forward. So there are possibilities.
When it comes to, going back to the issue of the share price though, when it comes to share price at 141, what most people want to know is, and I'm going to ask you to look into the future, is there room for it to increase, to go up? You think that's possible, David, even with 8 billion shares out there?
Well, it's possible because with any market, you have buyers and sellers, and if persons potentially miss out on the IPO or say that they want to buy more shares, they cannot go to the market and buy more, and if they're willing to pay the price, then the price can potentially go up. So when persons are saying why $1.41, this will be based on the relative rate of the US dollar, probably around November, because if you look at it, 1 US cent against $1.41 GMD translates to a price of about $1 US to 141 GMD. So in seeing the price is relatively high, I have to take into consideration that this is based on the US dollar conversion as well, because their reporting currency is in USD, but they collect in GMD. So you have that, as you said, I alluded to earlier, the quote-unquote mitigation of risk. So
last question, is there any benefit to buying in USD over JMD?
You'll be edging against devaluation as well in Jamaican terms. So I will say if you earn in US dollars, then you can take the opportunity to buy the shares in that currency, and then respectively for JMD as well.
Thanks for joining me, gentlemen.
Yeah.
Good discussion. Let's take our final break. When we come back, I have a surprise. Taking Stock, the Analysts was brought to you by Proven Wealth, Jamaica Money Market Brokers, and Ideal Portfolio Services. Welcome back to Taking Stock. Well, as you may have noticed, I have a little one in the oven and this baby can come any day now, right? So I've made some arrangements. I have some shows pre-recorded. And I also have a friend of mine who will be standing in starting next week, Mark Gale. Hey!
Hi, Kalila.
And you guys have seen Mark already on the program on the Analysts segment of the show. So you're going to be filling my shoes for a little bit.
Big shoes. Internet, please do not kill me. I'm no Kalila. I will do my best. I'll do my best.
Tell the people a little bit about your background.
I run an SME called TCP Things. We make Jamaican greeting cards and gift tags and tote bags for women. But I also do I love finance, I love economic. I'm also an active participant of #Finance Twitter JA, which you are a member of also. My academic background, I have an undergrad in computer science and I also have an MBA with a concentration in finance. And I think that, really kind of opened my appetite to, okay, your economics is beautiful, finance is wonderful. Being able to read the financials of a company is it's a skill that once you acquire it, you didn't realize how illiterate you were before.
That's so true.
Yeah. So
I think you'll do great. You have nothing to worry about.
I hope so.
Absolutely nothing to worry about. The next few weeks, you're in capable hands with Mark over here at Mark. And you have your TransJamaica IPO session coming up soon, right?
Yes. I hear you guys loud and clear. So by the time you see this, the class will be the following weekend. So you can just go to, hit me up on Twitter at Mark Gale, and I'll give you class information.
Okay, good stuff. Thanks, Mark. Well, that's our show for this week. Thanks for watching yet another week. If you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, click the link below. Subscribe now to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Kalila Ray. Follow me on Instagram. Check out my other features, Money Mondays JA, Money Moves JA, and What's in It for Me. I'm Kalila Reynolds. See you, not sure when, in a few weeks though. Actually, I will see you next week. You'll see me. I won't see you. Bye-bye.